China's leader Xi Jinping has asked Macron of France to help him avoid a new Cold War. But are we already in one? This is the question that I've been asking myself for a very long time, and even as I'm filming this, I'm not entirely sure where I'm going with it. Are we in a Cold War? Is there a Cold War? Is the Cold War boiling over and becoming a brand new hot war? Well, let's look at some of the evidence. The UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, he said that he was putting the economy on a war footing. Poland's Tusk, he said that these days were known as pre-war. And Ukraine, well, Ukraine are already in a war, which means that they need to up the ante a little bit when they're talking about Cold War. And they've just gone flat out and said, no, it's a global war that we're facing. We're almost going to have a global war. So when we look at those comparisons, war footing, pre-war, global war, you know what? I'll take Cold War any day. What's a Cold War really? It's just a psychological chess game, right? It's some countries competing with other countries, and they go into a bit of a mind game about economic stuff and being the better power. State of political hostility between countries characterized by threats, propaganda, and other measures short of open warfare. Soviet Union's Cold War with the US was just a big mixture of competing battles, trying to get this country to be on its side, going to space, trying to financially outdo each other, until finally one went bankrupt, Soviet Union, 1990. There was, of course, as well the Cuban Missile Crisis, when both superpowers had their missiles aimed at each other. Well, maybe we're already there. I mean, Russia's Vladimir Putin has threatened to nuke Western powers multiple times. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. They claimed that Ukraine were becoming expansionist and that there were bad people in Ukraine. Pretext, of course, because Ukraine hadn't committed any actual acts of hostility. Russia needed to have some sort of excuse to go in and expand its land. What Vladimir Putin didn't count on, though, was for Western powers to also get involved in Ukraine's defense. Russia had thought that because Ukraine is not part of NATO, Ukraine simply would not be able to last Russia's onslaught. What actually happened was European countries and NATO countries started ploughing financial aid and defense into Ukraine. Very shortly after that, weapons were coming in, and of course, they came in from America as well, a huge player in this global battle. Very easy now to, rather than refer to this as a Cold War, to refer to it as a proxy war. America and Russia have been fighting it out behind closed doors, at least, in Syria for some time. Russia will back these guys, America will back these guys, and the powers of Russia and America can be tested without actually going to war with each other. This time, Russia wasn't very impressed. Therefore, Russia said that if Russian troops were attacked, then it would be justification for a nuclear attack. So we find ourselves in a very similar position to the Cold War. Let's just go back to that Oxford Dictionary definition again. State of political hostility, check, at the moment we've got that, between countries characterized by threats, check, again, we have that. Propaganda, we definitely have that across all fronts, and other measures short of open warfare. It is true that Russia and America are not yet in direct open warfare, but they are doing it through means of propaganda, financial battles, sanctions, for example, and anything apart from actual open warfare. So surely we are there. Surely we can argue we're either in the kind of mix of a Cold War or a proxy war. No! Say political scientists, we cannot say that yet. One of the reasons is that it's very hard to label things and give things a brand in the middle of it. Very easy for historians to look back and say, yes, the Cold War started on this date. As it's ongoing, as it's opening up, this becomes a much trickier argument. Political scientists, they say that one of the things that makes a Cold War is ideology. It's that thing, that symbol, the one thing that countries battle it out between each other. It was much simpler in the days of the original Cold War. The Soviet Union were trying to export communism, and America and friends were trying to export capitalism. But these days, it's a little bit more confusing. America coming into Ukraine and providing it with weapons alongside other European countries was not in Putin's plan. Putin was supposed to take Ukraine in a few days, according to conversations, But it's now been, well, I think it's been about 800 days. And so far, Russia to this day hold about 20%, just under, of Ukrainian land. It did not go to plan. And the reason it didn't go to plan was partly because Russia did not expect the ambition and the defense of Ukraine, the will to hold on to its land, but also it didn't expect the amount of money and weapons to come in from NATO countries. So, for Russia to stop this, to stop the weapons and money coming in, it has engaged in several different tactics. Russia has used a mixture of propaganda to argue that Ukraine is corrupt and is misusing the funds, although it's not given in hardcore cash. Let's just point out weapons arrive and they are used on the front line. Russia has also said that by getting involved, European states and America are bringing themselves closer to a global war. Russia has repeatedly laid out red lines, which it does move, suggesting that breaching those red lines will mean a nuclear strike. And it's a threat that carries some weight. Russia does currently have the most nuclear weapons in its stockpile, according to official records, although the USA have just short of that number as well, second place in terms of global holder of nuclear weapons. But officials in the free world have long insisted that this war is not just about Ukraine or the balance of power in Europe. It's about the norms of the global affairs, and we have seen many other superpowers being dragged into this conflict. Russia likes to complain that it is being outnumbered by NATO and EU officials who are helping to fund the defense of Ukraine, but that hasn't stopped Russia going to other countries asking them for help too. Iran are known to be supplying hundreds, if not thousands, of drones for Russia's conflict. North Korea have recently struck several deals with Russia, providing rockets which have been used in Ukraine. And China have also been accused of providing fuel and components to assist Russia in this conflict as well. What can you say about this that would make it a ideological battle, to therefore be a Cold War? Well, we could say it's democracies versus autocracies. Autocracies, a system of government by one person with absolute power. And that is certainly the case for Russia. Yes, they've held some elections, but it seems that Putin holds most of the power in Russia. The same for North Korea. Kim Jong-un, his dynasty seems to hold a lot of power. Iran, Belarus also is on the sidelines as well. A bit of a dictatorship, a mini Russia on the side, hosting some of Russia's nuclear weapons as well, which look over to European borders. But if we just go back to Xi Jinping for a moment, he was doing a big tour of Europe. Now, he went to France, Serbia, and Hungary on his European leg of the trip. Very interesting countries for that trip, may I add. Serbia, he went to Serbia on the anniversary of the Chinese embassy being bombed by NATO in 1999, I believe it was. This can never happen again, said Xi Jinping. Rightfully so. Embassies should not be attacked by NATO, by Russia, by anybody. But China has for a very long time held the notion that NATO countries and America have too much power in the world. And this is a narrative shared with Russia as well. Russia seems to have ambitions to be a larger imperial power, but it can relate to China in the sense that it finds America being too much of a giant on the world stage. But this again fits into the narrative that China and Russia both have, or both want, that America should not be getting involved in a conflict outside of its own borders. The supreme leader of Iran as well has also deemed Putin's war as entirely justified. It is easy, therefore, for some people to argue that this potential Cold War is a battle between the West and non-Western states, or like me just now, arguing that it's democracy versus autocracy slash dictatorship. But I feel like that's still too simplistic. What if it's more just NATO versus non-NATO? I mean, NATO is a very big organization. They are 32 countries at the moment, a big defensive state, they say. And there are lots of countries like Russia who are very upset they were not allowed to be a part of NATO. There's a quote I really like from Bloomberg News, and I'm going to read it out to you. It's about the Cold War. And it said that at the time, Moscow and Washington backed local partners and bled each other dry in terms of finances. That's regarding the conflicts that ravaged the global south. There were the wars of decolonization in Africa and Asia, the insurgencies and civil wars in Latin America, and the brutal fights in Korea and Vietnam. They became arenas in which the superpowers maneuvered for advantage. Now, the war in Ukraine is deepening another struggle to set the terms of global order and pitting the rival coalitions, advanced democracies and Eurasian autocracies, against each other. It comes back to this idea of global dominance. Russia has been saying for a very long time, when Putin first came into power, that it wanted to also rise and become a global power in the wake of the Soviet Union collapse, but it felt like being in America's shadow was not good enough, and that America's influence over the world stopped Russia from growing to the height that it wanted to be at. What do you mean you're not going to let me invade Georgia? Russia was saying in the late 2000s. That's very unfair. America, do come across as hypocrites at times. They have often talked about freedom and leaving other countries alone, but their invasions in the Middle East, for example, cast a very awkward light on this idea of freedom. The Cold War originally had a lot of things going on. There was a space race, there was battle for influence, there was an ideological battle. Right now, it seems perhaps too premature to call the Ukraine and Russia conflict a proxy war, partly because there's a risk of troops literally colliding. But then at the same time, it also feels too premature to call this a Cold War, although it certainly seems to be going in that direction right now. There is also the worry that that'll all just become redundant if it becomes a global war. Nobody wants a trilogy just yet. The best way I find that we can look at this is to view it as a conflict that is fast becoming a Cold War. The Ukraine and Russia conflict could easily be seen as a first chapter in this Cold War. There are other battles going on across the field. We recently saw Iran and Israel, if only for a few minutes, but still trading missiles with each other in the sky. Likewise, there's talk of China and Taiwan. Now, to quickly give you a detour, Russia has backed China in claiming that Taiwan is part of China. Yet America and America's friends, they argue that Taiwan is an independent country. We therefore see a very similar situation where Russia, China and its friends are backing one country, China in this case, and America and friends are backing another country, Taiwan. We can therefore view Russia and Ukraine as chapter one potentially in a brand new Cold War. Other battles ongoing will fit a similar trend with similar supporters. But given the way things are going, the way people are throwing their tantrums and getting very annoyed with nuclear saber rattling at the moment, let's hope that it stays on chapter one of a Cold War. If a Cold War suddenly becomes a hot war, that's not going to be good.